Hello, welcome to another episode, our first live episode of 2022 of Fresh Natural Live. And Happy New Year to everyone. And I hope you enjoyed last week's show. There's a little bit of a glitch in uploading those video recordings. And we actually aired it on Tuesday instead of Monday. But anyway, we have a great show tonight, as usual. We've talked about this concept a fair amount during other shows, this whole concept of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, if you are familiar with. And there's often a lot of talk about it. And there's often question, well, does GMO matter? What effects does it have on us? Is there a lot of science as to the health benefits or potential adverse health effects of genetically modified foods? And so, my esteemed colleague and friend, Dr. Pam Atkins, is going to lead us into discussion on this. I think this is very important. I personally have recently started buying most of my produce from local growers. And one thing I've noticed when I, look at produce in some sections of the farmers markets, I know there's a certain amount of diversity within the produce. If it's grown in the garden, the peppers have different shapes and looks to them. Pretty much if you walk out into, say, a busy city area, people walking, different heights and sizes and shapes and things like that. If you go into the supermarket and you look at the bell peppers, there's a certain amount of uniformity to it. They all look the same. And I think I made this comment on a show before. Just imagine if you were to walk out into the streets and everybody looked exactly the same. You would kind of look around and say, there's something wrong with this picture. And so I think we should take that attitude about our food. So this whole concept of GMO foods, I think, is the one that we need to delve into, and we're going to do exactly that tonight. So stay tuned. We have a great show for you tonight. Get your pens and pencils out. I think you're going to get a lot of great information. So look forward to seeing you on the other side. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. And as I said before, we're going to talk about this concept of GMO. We're going to take it head on tonight. I think it's a very important concept because as we frequently talk about, what we put in our system food-wise is very important. It's really our natural medicines. And so, what's done to the food before we get it is really important. So without further ado, I'm going to bring my friend and colleague on, Dr. Atkins. How are you doing, Dr. Pamela Atkins? We're going to have the other Dr. Atkins on tonight, perhaps pretty soon.
Hi.
So I have to use first and last name. How are you doing today?
Doing good, hanging in here.
And so
share this information.
Her partner in crime, Dr. Floyd Atkins. Hello, sir. How are you doing today? I think you're on mute still.
Okay, how about that? How are you doing
Yeah, that
today?
sounds perfect. Yeah, welcome to the show. Happy New Year.
Thank
And we're
you.
going to be taking on this whole concept of GMO. The issue of GMO. There was a while where I would give some thought to it, but not much. And I said, well, I don't know. And I remember hearing someone give a talk, and they made the point, well, foods they grow, and the seeds kind of they cross germinate, and there's some natural aspect of how foods evolve, and so there's a natural GMO, if you will. But is that truly different than what we know of that happens in the food laboratories? And so I really would like to get into that whole concept. So Dr. Atkins, what is GMO, and kind of help us get started with that whole concept. And what is GMO, and is it good for us, bad for us? How do we start this discussion? Oops, you muted.
Genetically modified organisms or food is when they take a species of food or plant or animal or insect and they cross it with a species, another species, unlike species, and they're trying to achieve some type of quality, especially in food, and so they insert this DNA and combine this DNA and to produce these qualities, and but there are potentials for adverse effects that we're not having considered. But I'm thinking sometimes we don't always think about health. We just think about what makes it easy, maybe less insects or more resistant to a herbicide or can have longer shelf life and things like that. So that's what the food industry has developed. So it's genetic engineering.
So JB has a hard time finding grapes with seeds in them. You have, and the grapes can be labeled organic, but they won't have seeds.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Right. I think, if you have grapes or watermelon with no seeds, I wouldn't buy it because that's naturally how it comes. But I think that we, have been spoiled and they say, okay, we'll take out the seeds, but it is not the way God has made it. It's not the way that was designed for us. And so things have happened to make it seedless.
Yeah, that's it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm gonna bring lots of people in the plant-based community, like to quote Genesis 1:29,
Hmm.
and I'll do a quick screen share here because and I'm not trying to preach to anyone, but I thought it was pretty interesting that if you look at some of the scriptures, and God said, "Behold, I've given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which it is fruit of the tree yielding seed, to you it shall be meat." So this whole concept of bearing seed and yielding seed is one that it's borne out in the scriptures. Now, whether someone believes the scripture or not, I mean, it's another issue. But I think there's something to be said for food existing in its natural state. And if it's natural food to have seeds, then and you're eating food that doesn't have seed, there's something to that. What do we know? What information do we have on in terms of some of the scientific evidence? Has anyone done any studies looking at the issue of genetically modified foods versus non-GMO foods?
Yeah, I have some slides I can share with you. Are they ready, Dr. Lloyd?
While you pull it out, hello JD, Leslie Coleman. Let's say hello to everyone. Dellum, hello to everyone, and Peter Simon. Hello everyone who's signing into the chat. A few people are signing in here today. And while you pull that up, I mentioned, to the group, the different aspects of GMO, and and that's certainly the genetic engineering of it, making it resistant to pesticides, making it last longer on the shelf. There are different components of those things, and there's certainly a convenience to all of this, and we love this convenience. But are we paying a price for this convenience? And there's a convenience of sitting in the house all day or lying in bed all day. That's pretty convenient. But are we paying a price for that? And so let's start to look at the scientific breakdown. I want to welcome Dr. Celeste Palmer to the stage here.
Hello.
And I'll bring this comment off here. And so GMO has got to go. I love that. So I think based on the title, we know where you stand on GMO.
Yeah, I guess yes, it says it all there, but we have to, we have to take care of our bodies and we have to make choices for our bodies. So, so with that being said, as we said, the DNA material from certain species of plants are, are combined with DNA of different viruses and vectors or animals or fish or scorpions to create the desired effect, whatever the engineers have desired to happen. So that's what genetically modified is. And so in 1992, the FDA decided that they regarded genetically modified foods as just traditional foods and no different than hybridized foods. And so they really just let their guard down and didn't really require any studies, any scientific studies or testing, etc., to approve genetically engineered foods. So there were scientists, that's FDA scientists, that spoke out and said that there is a profound difference, unexpected effects from traditional breeding and genetic engineering. So um, there were scientists that disagreed, but they were overruled by the administrators. And so now we have genetically engineered genetic GMO foods. Now, the genetic engineers proposed that this is why we have genetically engineered food. They say, oh, it's a higher crop yield. So we can provide more food to hungry people. And sometimes you'll see videos or references to the Irish potato famine back in the 1800s and how there was a drought and problems with potatoes, and so people went hungry. So that is one reasoning they use, that we can feed more people and they can send food to Africa and other third world countries. However, some countries will not accept their genetically modified food, but that we send. But that's one. The other thing is they say it reduces farm costs, but we've heard from farmers and they don't always agree with that. It also say it increases the profit. I guess we have more produce can increase the profit. They say it's safer for the environment, and we will find out that is not correct. And they say can produce more nutritious foods. Well, sometimes they say they can engineer a food if they want. For example, there was an example of a rice that they wanted more vitamin A because in some Asian countries they felt they had a big, the rice was a big staple and they weren't getting enough vitamin A, so they made a rice, a yellow rice with vitamin A. But and this was actually, this happened in the United States, some of the farmers, but the rice that was produced, was genetically engineered and it soon got into the rice supply. And 30% of the rice became genetically modified, and the farmers had problems with their crops and their food and their land. It was a big mess, and Monsanto was sued over this, and the two farmers that sued won. So there are issues, but that's what the reasoning for the proposed to use make genetically modified foods. Um, the Center for Safety, Food Safety, is an organization that's been around 20 years, and it is not under the FDA. I think FDA has something similar, but it's not the FDA organization, but it's promoting organic, ecologically sustainable alternatives for food. And they cited 6 potential human concerns with genetic engineering and genetic modified foods. And so we're going to talk about these 6: toxicity, antibiotics, immune suppression, cancer, allergic reactions, and nutrition.
Okay.
So, talking about toxicity. So talk about toxicity with genetic engineering. The producers that the genetic engineering producers were never full aware of when they inserted this genetic material, or sometimes they call it a cassette, where it's inserted in the other genetic material of the other organism, and how safe is it? They hope that the genetic material would not destabilize the food or make it harmful. That was the hope. And so FDA scientists warned, some of the scientists in the FDA spoke up and warned the FDA and were concerned that it may increase the levels of toxicants. When they talk about toxicants, these are like man-made chemicals that you find in the environment, like benzene, and herbicides, and pesticides, and all breakdown products of all this of the industry. And they said the appearance of these toxicants may increase the capability of concentrating toxic substance may increase, that our bodies may concentrate more of these substances instead of getting rid of them. And so they were very concerned. And there's an example of this tomato called the Calgene Flavor Savor tomato. This was the very first food that the FDA approved and put on the market that was genetically engineered, and this was in 1994. And it was found later that the rats that were fed this tomato developed stomach lesions. And the FDA had approved this tomato against concerns of scientists, no pre-marketing testing. They just put it on the market. And in around 1997, it just kind of disappeared from the market. And I was trying to research what happened, and all I could find was one of the marketing people representing the company, which was affiliated with Monsanto, said it was a money loss, or that it wasn't. It cost more for them, the cost ratio, and they just took it off. But that was the very first one.
So the data on the rat lesions, the stomach lesions in the rats, was that data available to the FDA before they approved it? Did that come out later, as opposed to?
I think it came out later because they really didn't authorize studies. So I think, but I'm not sure about this, that the timing of it, because it's hard to find some of this information for some reason.
Some reason, yeah.
Yeah.
That's sounds kind of familiar. FDA approving things without adequate scientific studies, but go ahead.
So yes, there's some, anyways, the antibiotic resistance is another concern, and with genetically modified foods, they may cause bacteria-resistant strains of bacteria to antibiotics. We know that many genetically engineered foods, they use an antibiotic resistant marker that helps to identify that something in my throat. I'm sorry. I had a smoothie, little pieces of berry in my throat. So anyway, these markers to help identify these antibiotic resistant markers to identify where the genetic material is. So they use that just to kind of locate it, but it has created more antibiotic resistance. So one example is Novartis. There's a BT maize or corn, that has been genetic engineered, and it has a it was combined with has an ampicillin resistant gene. So
Hmm.
so this, for people that consume corn, it is possible that can it can increase the risks of developing resistance to ampicillin, which is a fairly inexpensive antibiotic to treat infections in children and adults. And so when you develop more resistant strains of bacteria, you're creating more expensive antibiotics all the time and risking infections that may not be resistant, where you have limited antibiotics to use against the bacterial infection.
That's an interesting point because, when I think about antibiotic resistance of microorganisms, and I remember in my training, if somebody came in with a community acquired pneumonia, uh, it would say, okay, you treat them with penicillin or ampicillin because, the bug came from the community and you wouldn't have a lot of antibiotic resistance in the community because the antibiotic resistance is mostly hospital. So if it's we call it nosocomial being a hospital acquired infection, then that's more likely to have antibiotic resistance. And so, that was the standard rule and teaching. But over time, you're seeing more antibiotic resistant microbes come out of the community. Now, the interesting thing about the point you just made is that, I was always of the thought process, and perhaps it's still true, that the big contribution to antibiotic resistance are the antibiotics that are used in the animal products. And so the animal protein is consumed. So a lot of people are being exposed to antibiotics in the community based on the animal protein of the cows and the chickens and all of that. But now you're posing something different. Now you have the corn, which may have introduced some level of ampicillin resistance. And so the genetically engineering process may be contributing to the community acquired antibiotic resistant microbes in addition to the animal approach. Now, I know you're going to address this later on. I'm going to throw this question up now. We don't have to address it now, but it's a great set of questions. How do you know if you're buying GMO? Does organic mean GMO? I know the answer to this first part here. And how do we know these corporations are being honest? So, Dr. Palmer, put a pin on that and help us come back to that later as we get in our discussion. So, immune suppression. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we're wondering what does it do? What does the genetically engineered foods do to our immune system? And there was a journal, Lancet journal, published article from Dr. Pizzati and Dr. Ewan under a grant from the British government. Somehow we see a lot of these studies from other countries, not rarely from the United States. I imagine it's hard to get funding in the United States for these type of studies. But what he found was, or they found, was with the consumption of the genetically engineered potato, which contained the BT or Bacillus thuringiensis, and they found that this potato had some effect on the on the laboratory rats that affect organ development, affect body metabolism, and it affected the immune system. And so once this study came out, this doctor, especially Dr. Pizzati, the lead doctor, was under attack by the industry, the biotechnology industry. And but they said, as when as of today, his study still stands. It can't be refuted. And there were 22 uh, leading scientists that later came out and supported what he said. And they said there's definitely a link between the genetically engineered food and suppression of the immune system.
And this is important because obviously everybody's worried about immune system function this time of the year, and particularly during this pandemic, as the people are concerned about coronavirus. And so, the food we consume has a big impact on our health. And so, again, it's an interesting piece of data there about the genetic engineering of the food and how it can adversely affect us.
Yes, and so the other factor was cancer. How does this genetic engineering, what effect can it have on cancer? And so in 1993, FDA approved the use of the bovine growth hormone, the RBGH, that is used diffusely in dairy cows and dairy industry. And if you have any milk products, you know, that's non-organic, non-GMO, it probably is in it. And so they found out that this growth hormone will increase the level of IGF, or the growth factor IGF-1. And I think some of your tests, they test for that. And this is a growth factor that is linked to stimulating breast cancer cells, prostate cancer cells, colon cancer cells, and it's in dairy products.
Hmm.
So, so that's a concern. So, that's why I always tell my patients that are concerned, and we're on a preventive path to get off of milk and cheese and animal products like that, and because of those concerns. In Canada and Europe rejected the use of this hormone, and they recognized a study that the FDA had failed to recognize that showed that that growth hormone, when digested, it passed through to the intestine and the bloodstream. It was believed that it was destroyed in the stomach with the gastric acid, but it can pass, and so that is a concern.
Dr. Atkins, can I add in something too?
Yes.
This is just something that I often remind my patients of, is that even without the recombinant bovine growth hormone, milk is a growth hormone. By nature, it is the way that mother cows pass their growth factors to their baby, to their calf. So we have to just keep in mind that it is a growth hormone, no matter how you slice it.
Yes.
And I just want to just throw this question, put a pin in this one, Dr. Palmer. We'll come back to it. Why is the FDA allowed to operate so irresponsibly? That's a hot question. We'll get to that later. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Allergic reaction.
So as far as how does it contribute to allergic reactions? Genetically engineered food can be transmitted to other foods, or the genetic material they can transmit to other foods and cross different foods together. And so foods that we may not think normally that we may have an allergy or sensitivity to, people are reacting to. And why is that? Well, there was one example, the New England Journal of Medicine reported that there was a gene that was combined from Brazil nut with the soy gene. And so people that have nut allergies, could potentially have reactions to soy products. And soy is in everything. And, it's soybean oils in a lot of foods and processed foods, and soy protein. So people can unknowingly have an allergic reaction that think they're only allergic to nuts. So that is one concern. And other concern is just that the allergy reactions are on the rise. So we think there are more cross reactivities going on with other foods, more and more foods being genetically engineered. And that is a concern. And I was thinking, if I have a friend that, talked about, when she carries the EpiPen, and she went somewhere and she had some type of food, and she felt she was having some reaction. And fortunately, it wasn't a serious reaction, but she said everything in there was nothing I was sensitive to. I asked the waiter and found out the ingredients, but we may not know. So it's
Yeah, and so it raised a level of complexity, because we have a lot of patients that come in and say, I'm allergic to the food, I'm allergic to that food. And the question is, are you allergic to that food, or is there some aspect of that food? And you have these allergists who do these extensive allergy tests, So, well, you're allergic to this food, and this food. And then the question is, what's the source of the, allergen? Are they getting, I don't know anything, the first thing about an allergy test, but are they getting their, allergens from antigens from genetically modified sources, or they're from pure antigens, or whatever the case may be? So where the food antigens coming from in the allergy test, and then people who have frank allergies, are they allergic to the genetically modified version or the real version? I've already said it's unnatural to be allergic to nature. And so maybe they're not allergic to natural foods, they're allergic to unnatural foods. And that's essentially what they're exposed to.
But there's another level of complexity with this is that we don't really spend time in nature. So and what I mean by that is eating nature. So if we don't eat it, the body doesn't get to equilibrate to it. And so then when we do see it for the first time, now we have a reaction to it.
Yeah. And these adverse reactions they're not necessarily IgE modified, IgE mediated immune responses, but rather, hey, I feel bad, or I feel achy, or I feel whatever. And they could be all kinds of biochemical reactions that people say I'm allergic to this because I have this reaction. But you're right. There are a lot of factors involved, with this. And so we just put the stamp allergy and just move on. And we don't spend time thinking about it, investigating it, and understanding it. But there's a lot to be understood here, especially in terms of what happens to our food.
Yeah, so it can be inflammatory triggers and things like that, but I think it's, like you said, it's not always just an IgE reaction, but there's some IgG reactions that some people call allergies, but maybe, inflammatory. But
Let me ask you this question. So let's say, I don't know, you've got some food scattered on the table. Is there a methodology by which one could analyze the food and determine whether it's genetically modified or not? Granted, grapes without seeds, okay, that we've got that one. But let's say a spinach leaf, and let me leave corn out. It's mostly just, let's say spinach or tomatoes.
yeah,
Can
I
you?
mean,
Is
you
there
almost
something
need,
else you can do?
oh, okay. You almost need to be a scientist because they can, the scientists can look at the to investigate to see if it is, but sometimes we can't do it with our eye and looking at it, like you said, other than, whether it has seeds or not, that could be hybridized or it could be genetically modified, but you're right, we can't, reading labels is going to be something we can do, but if we don't know we don't know about the labels, then that we're kind of in the dark. But they said when they brought the genetically engineered food to the forefront, they said that, it could be more nutritious. But what we're finding is that the scientists were concerned that there was a potential change. There would be a potential change for the worse for nutrition value, and I think they're right. I think I don't think the majority of food is more nutritious. Scientists were concerned that there would be an altered level of nutrients also in the food. So that is another concern. As far as identification, reading labels, I try to teach my patients to read labels and read the numbers on foods. And most of us that try to eat clean, and when you buy organic, if you're not going to a community garden or local grower, you want to see nines. You want to see 5 digits, and a 9 is the first digit. We know that's organic. If it's conventionally grown and not necessarily organic, it will start with a 3 or 4 and have 4 digits. But if it is genetically modified, it should have 5 digits starting with the 8. So we want to be aware of those 8s. And things are changing all the time, so we have to kind of keep up with if there's any additional change going on in the future with labeling. But
But how about the organic grapes and organic watermelon that have no seeds? I mean, they'll have a 9 in front of them, but they have no seeds, and so they must be genetically modified.
well, they're hybridized, probably hybridized, but probably not genetically modified.
So
They're
explain the
hybridized.
difference for our audience.
Yeah. So that means taking uh, a portion of one fruit and combining with the other, like you may have like broccolini or something like that, where it's changed to bring on a certain behavior or a sweeter carrot, etc. There are some, some authorities that really want us to back away from hybridization, and we want to eat more vegetables as the original state. That's why you have the 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 what they call it, the heirloom tomatoes and heirloom vegetables and things like that, because we know they haven't been changed from many years, but
And,
many times they change it, just to, make it sweeter, less seeds, things of that nature. Um, but it's hard to find watermelon sometimes without seeds unless you go to a health food store, and sometimes it may be hard there.
I mean, the hybridization, I understand what you're saying there, but I mean, I just don't understand how hybridization will get rid of the seeds. It seems like that's a huge change. I mean, if you kind of combine two, you get a kind of confluence of two types of foods. But I mean, part of me think that they're just mislabeling a lot of things. But again, I don't
Well,
know.
well, with the hybridization, one thing they do is they might go to a series of 8 or 10 different hybridize. They make the seeds smaller and smaller and smaller. That's why with those watermelons, you see that's the smaller size. The seeds are little and white, and they're not black or large seeds because they keep crossbreeding them until the seeds get so small that they're basically not there. Then you can eat them without the seeds. The thing with the genetic engineering is when they really change the structure that you get a different color or you get a different texture, or whether it's really not the same at all. But again, hybridization I think can make it harder to digest or either replicate the same fruit you had before, because once you hybridize it, it can never go back. It's always going to move forward. It can be something else. So I think in the long run, Dr. Pam is right that heirloom is a way to stay if you really want to have the healthiest fruit. And one thing I want to tell the audience too, when you go to the grocery store, we rarely see 8s. And if you look at your produce numbers, because states like Texas and many states, they're not required to even put the labeling on there. They passed a law years ago that said we don't have to put the label on. We can the format was put out there, but it's up to the states. It's up to even food producers to determine whether they want to put the 8s on there. And so a lot of times you won't even see it.
Yeah, and to the point you raise, a lot of people like to eat fish. They think it's the universal healthy food, but they've been genetically modifying fish, particularly salmon, for some time now, and it's actually been mixed in with the regular salmon. And to your point, they haven't been required to label. So you buy the salmon, you don't know if you've got the real thing or Memorex, and so.
Right.
Is all genetically modified. I mean, a lot of it is, and it's genetically engineered. It's mixed in with the regular stuff, and so you don't know what you're getting.
So we're talking about genetic engineering and GMOs. We cannot leave out glyphosate, and glyphosate is the chemical that's in Roundup, and it is very prevalent herbicide. And I was once asked to appear on one of the morning shows, and because a study came out saying that the Environmental Working Group did a review on oat cereal and found that they had some alarming levels of glyphosate in it. Any level is alarming, but this is in why is Roundup in our cereal, in oat cereal of all brands, even even the Quaker Oats and some of the brands that you see on the screen that we give to children. And we find out that glyphosate has been used in the agricultural industry for a while, and it's a well kept secret. But it came to the marketplace in 1974 as a herbicide, but there was no data collected and provided since until 1990. And Monsanto, it's been a big money maker coming out with the Roundup, which is the weed killer, and many people may know it, use it in their driveway or on cracks or around the house, etc. But it is used in the industry as well on food that we eat. And there has been a dramatic increase of genetically modified food because of glyphosate, because when the food is when we use herbicides growing in agriculture, they said, let's produce a product or food that's resistant to the herbicide. So the weeds will be killed, but the food will not be killed if we spray it with Roundup. So that's what happened. And but we find there are concerns with Roundup that being disruptive to animals and to humans, and affecting perhaps the detoxification process. They find that that we can become more vulnerable to numerous chemicals because when we're exposed to glyphosate and by consuming it or some residues in our food or in our environment, that can prevent us from detoxifying chemicals as well, our natural detoxification process, and can be an endocrine disruptor as well. So that is a concern. And so with glyphosates, it's used in the industry as a desiccant that, for foods that need to be dried, it will, it is openly used there. It's a well-kept secret. Recently, wheat was added to the list in 2021, barley, some nuts like almond, rice, seeds, dried beans, pecans, nuts. I mentioned almonds, sugarcane, beets. I mentioned sweet potatoes, and so this is a concern, and it is approved. It is the number one herbicide used in the world, and the United States is the number one utilizer of glyphosate. It was, like I said, it was developed by Monsanto, but Monsanto is now called Bayer, as in our Bayer aspirin, Bayer.
Yeah.
That they own the Roundup and that herbicide. But it's been approved in agriculture, industry, forestry, etc. And so they've been busy creating foods that are resistant to the glyphosate. So it's been used diffusely. And as far as finding it in our environment, we find it in soil, we find it in groundwater, we find it in seawater and air, and stems and leaves of GMO foods like soy. This AMPA is the amino methyl phosphonic acid, but it's a primary degradation product of the glyphosate. So many times when scientists are looking to see if certain foods, if they take it to lab, have it in it, they look for this breakdown product. And so it's pretty prevalent, and so it's a false claim that it's reducing pesticide loads. The pesticide is in the same family as herbicides, and we have seen that since the introduction of genetically engineered seeds in 1996, the amount of glyphosate use has gone up. It was 27 million pounds a year in 1996, and this is in the United States. And the last number I saw was 287 million pounds in 2016. I haven't seen any numbers since then, so I'm sure it's alarming.
Fascinating. Unfortunate. There was a couple of questions that came up. I'm going to address this
Okay.
one real quick regarding wild caught salmon. We have to be careful with this labeling. So in our class that we teach a healthy lifestyle series, we bring on some experts on video form, and the industry, they have a way of labeling. So what's considered wild caught is not what's truly been living in the wild, grew up in the wild. They can get farm raised fish, salmon, and what they have to do is just let it swim from one part of a lake to another and catch it a certain number of feet, and they can consider it wild caught. So it was raised in a farm, genetically engineered, but then it can meet the criteria of wild caught. So the fact that it's labeled wild caught does not mean that it's not undergo farm raising or genetic modification or anything. It's just that they meet a certain criteria that allow them to use a certain label. And when you look at that label, it says I'm eating wild caught salmon. Even if it is truly wild caught, it's not optimal for your health, but that's another story. It doesn't mean that it has not been exposed to poison through farm raised environment or genetic engineering. It's just that they meet some arbitrary criteria that say it's wild. It's sort of like saying this is healthy. What's the criteria for being healthy? Well, if it looks pink, it's healthy. Okay, that's the criteria, so I can put healthy on it. So, these labels are arbitrary. And you have the Food and Drug Administration, and somebody asks, well, how can they get away with this? Well, when you're in a certain powerful position as an establishment and there's no true oversight, then you can get away with it because you write the rules and there's nobody that oversees you. The administrators overrule the scientists. And oh, by the way, much of their budget is supported by either the drug industry or the food industry or these guys. And so if you're in partnership with the people that you're trying to regulate, it's very easy that you can get away with this. And these, by the way, are the people paying off the scientists. I mean, not the scientists, but the administrator, the Congress, legislators, who are supposed to be providing, legal oversight by means of laws and regulations. But they're compromised as well. And so, that's how they can get away with it because it's, the fox is guarding the hen house.
Exactly. So, so I guess Benbrook in 2012 showed that there was 527 million pounds of herbicides being used. So this is not just glyphosate, but herbicides being used, but quite a bit. And so we think there's more resistance now to the spread of glyphosate. There's more resistant weeds being developed, so more herbicides are being applied and developed. And genetic engineering it's been a boom with genetic engineering, especially in things like corn and soybeans. And as far as glyphosates, that, as I said, it's the highest rate or use in the United States, although other developed countries and perhaps some non-developed countries use glyphosates. And in July 2013, the EPA raised the allowable level for glyphosate in our food. So they who's looking out for us?
Now, was that because of clinical findings of a glyphosate deficiency in our diet? Is that what the reasoning for that was?
I don't think so, but it's I think it's just a great moneymaker, and some are making money, but we have to be mindful of our health. And
Melanie
so,
Reed, Melanie Reed points out the CEO of Pfizer was just head of FDA. I don't know that for a fact, but what I do know, and I'm not questioning, I suspect she's correct. But what I do know, and Dr. Campbell talks about this, is that you have the heads of regulations. There's an interchange between the industry, and so oftentimes, you're head of the FDA for a certain period of time, and you write some or support some favorable regulation, the policies that feed into this industry, and the next thing you know, you're retired here and you're going getting paid here. And
Yeah.
so that's been reported frequently, and that's in part how they get away with it.
Well, one thing I want to add to that is that there have been 5 CEOs of Monsanto who have been head of the FDA. So, like you say, it goes back and forth. You end up as the head of the FDA, and then the chemical industry will hire you, and that's pharmaceuticals and food industry. And then once a new president comes in, he'll appoint a head of the FDA. And a lot of times it's CEOs from the large corporations because they assume they know better, or it's like you said, it's all politics and economics.
Yeah, and the tragedy in all this stuff is that these guys, they don't let physicians take a pen from a drug rep. Not that that's something I'm up in arms about, but the level of stupidity where you're going to fine tune the regulations over here to where, okay, you can't take a pen from a drug rep, but yet these heads of regulatory, we're making the laws. We're not making any laws. We're writing prescriptions, which, that could be problems there, I understand. But you've got these guys who are controlling the system and go back and forth and be controlled by industry. And I think part of our mission here is to inform you first and foremost about the things you need to do to improve your overall health and well-being, the knowledge we share with you. So that's level one. But the other level is to inform you so that hopefully you can educate your broader community of this. Because as a community, all of these things have to be a grassroots approach. And we can't let these industries and FDA get away with it. Dr. Atkins mentioned some lawsuits from Monsanto, and they've gotten hit hard with the glyphosate issues and the like. Now, of course, they have the budget for it, but there have been some lawsuits being taken, and people have won in court. And hopefully, that's one approach to, at the very least, not only do they have the lawsuit and the fines, but these things become a matter of public information when it goes to the court. And I'm just hoping that there are enough people, critical enough mass of people who are awake and alert and who are willing to do something. It's doing something as simple as not buying these foods and shopping at your farmer's market from your local growers, and then maybe forming, political reaction groups that take to the streets or get petitions and raise noise to our elected officials that something needs to be done. So it starts here with being informed, and then we take action at different levels.
okay, so for glyphosate in diseases, I mean, what does it do to the body? And these are some of the references that we found that it can, the glyphosate does affect the cytochrome P450 system pathways. And as docs, we know that affects the metabolism and liver metabolism and breakdown of different drugs and chemicals. And so that can't be impaired with the glyphosates and we are exposed to it. So that is not good. The glyphosate enhances damaging effects to these chemicals as a result. And we know that there can be more inflammation in the body, the inflammation that damages cellular systems. It can impair sulfate transport mechanism, and sulfate is very important, and glutathione and other forms in the body The Western diet, they think the traditional Western diet where we're just eating indiscriminately can contribute to that. We think glyphosates can contribute to gastrointestinal disorders and obesity, diabetes, heart disease, depression, autism, infertility, cancer, and even Alzheimer's, to name a few, can contribute to it. We can't say many of these disorders are multifactorial, but this is a very a factor that we need to consider. What are we putting in our bodies? Other references about diseases associated or conditions associated with glyphosate. There are some studies with animals and concerns about our knowledge of kidney and liver disorders with animals ingesting feed that has genetically engineered feed in it. There's also cons- concerned about killing our microbiome. We talk about the good bacteria or the probiotics in our digestive tract that keeps our immune system strong. Well, these can be knocked out with things like glyphosates. And so that's a concern. There is a study that looked at horses and cows, and when they're fed the feed with this type of glyphosates in it, that it can develop some highly pathogenic bacteria that can become a problem. And so that is a concern. And so, I mean, we don't eat horses. Some people eat cows and other things, but we eat, we're eating the food, or if we're indirectly eating the animals to eat the food, it can affect us. So, again, they talked about corn and soy causing stomach inflammation in pigs. So if the pig's stomach is inflamed and we eat the pig, what are we doing to our body? So a little bit, and the last slide on this diseases, birth defects have been reported, reproductive effects, invertebrates, also evidence of endocrine disruptors, disrupting the endocrine system, where it can overstimulate breast, uterus, ovary, prostate, etc. Toxic effects to the liver, damage to the DNA. We're damaging our DNA. What is it doing to our future children and increasing for adults, increasing the risk for cancer diagnosis. So this is real. And so these are some of the references for the scientific people. Also they showed causes multiplication or increase of estrogen sensitive human breast cancer cells. So, also that's in the hormone disruptor category. So, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but we just want to be aware some of the foods that are most commonly genetically modified, and I just encourage everyone to Google a list of genetically modified foods and try to get it as current as possible. These are a few common ones, but there's so many added on that are not on here. So we talked about corn and soy. Cotton, cotton is really made with the pesticides and can be affected by, the herbicides and things like that. But cotton is really not made to eat, but they put cottonseed oil in foods, because it's a very inexpensive oil, but usually it has, chemicals in it, as well as herbicides and things like that. Papaya was a surprising one to me. We talked about rice, the canola oil. Many healthy foods may have canola oil in it, and I would say if the canola oil is not organic, I would not eat the food that has canola oil in it, because it can have these residues in it. Potatoes. You think of potatoes as being benign, but they're not so benign. And tomatoes, Dairy products we already talked about, and it's not just milk, but you get the cheese and yogurt and cream sauces and peas, and so so look at there are some more extensive lists, but I just encourage everyone to. It's more. It's encouraging us to eat organic or grown or local farmer, local gardens that grow without pesticides, read labels, and just to be more conscious. So these days it's not being picky. If you want to stay healthy, you got to know what's going on with your body. So this is from George Washington Carver. It says, "If freedom of speech is paganly taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to a slaughter."
Hmm. Well
So
put. Well put. Excellent presentation. It's very sobering information because we um, rely on our government industry to provide protection. Not only do we rely on them, we pay them, to provide uh, protection, safety in our food sources, and the like. But not only are they not providing the safety, but they are um, in bed with or business with, if you will, private industry to serve the special interests of private industry at the expense, the health expense of the general public. And so it's very very unfortunate, very tragic. Like I always say to Dr. Palmer, it gives us something to do. I guess maybe that's the bright side of it. I'm not sure if there's a bright side to it, but we have to first be aware of these things, and we have to um, be aware and take action first and foremost in our own lives by not eating these foods, not purchasing these foods, by supporting local growers who are not using these methodologies. That at the very simple level, we can each and all start to do work at that level. But I don't think we need to stop there. I think we need to maybe organize within our communities. Obviously, you can share this information. And by the way, if you find this information to be beneficial, hit the thumbs up button to save it on the YouTube algorithm. And also, by all means, share this video. This is a very important topic, and lots of people need to know this. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the channel. You'll get more enlightening information. But the point is that we have to take action. It's one thing to sit around and talk and complain and talk about the conspiracy theories and there's a lot of talk about the current pandemic and all of the things going on, but we have to take action, and the action starts with the behavior and the personal life in terms of health practices, and then it goes beyond there. Share information like this with loved ones, family, and friends, and then start to take action in your community. You can do something as simple as starting a group. You can do it on social media and say, okay, we're going to support our local growers. We're going to get 10, 20 people, 100, 200, 500 people. And we're not going to go to the supermarket until they stop serving GMO foods. Maybe you can do that type of thing. So there's a lot that we can do. We just have to have the mindset that the power lies within us, both at an individual level and in small groups and in bigger groups. Let's not just sit back and say, well, it's the powerful FDA and powerful Monsanto. No, we can take action at small levels, and we can communicate these actions to other people. And then you reach what's called a tipping point. And so the more people start to take action, you get a critical mass of people, and then it has an exponential growth in terms of behavior. So that tipping point of supporting local growers, a tipping point of boycotting supermarkets that have GMO foods, and one thing should lead to the other. But it starts with information, and that's what we try to provide here. We hope this has been informative to you. We thank you for all your comments in the chat and all the insight. And we want to continue to push this movement. I'm going to turn the stage over to my colleagues. Dr. Palmer, any comments?
Well, I was just thinking as you were saying that we have to, especially for the children, we really don't have a choice anymore. I feel like we've gotten to a point where we really don't have a choice. We have to start taking charge and taking some responsibility and teaching the children a difference, because what is happening, a lot of children are only wanting to eat processed foods and, the chips and things like this. And all of that is basically GMO. And so then they have a lot of stomach ache, they have a lot of, immune system issues. And so now you're piling on more health issues on a child. So in 10 or 15 years, when they are young adults and adults, we hit a wall as far as what's going to happen to their health and what we will consider healthy in 10 to 15 years from now if all they've been taking in is genetically modified food, which has not built a healthy foundation for their future.
Now, let me, I've heard you talk about some of the food that the kids are eating. I mean, a lot of them are eating just the super processed junk. So, I mean, we got to get them on. I mean, the genetically modified produce is kind of a step above what.
Well, I'm not even right. We're not even talking about produce. We're just talking about junk. Because if you
Yeah.
think about a child's diet, most of the time in the morning they're eating cereal. And Dr. Atkins just showed us the cereals are GMO. Then for lunch, they may be eating some noodles, ramen noodles, and we know that that's a whole disaster. And then for dinner, mom may cook some chicken or and something else, but that in most cases is very little fruits and vegetables at all anyway. And then in many cases, people are not seeking out necessarily non-GMO organic fruits and vegetables when they have a large family. So I know it's complicated. I know it takes a little bit more time, but that's why we often talk about growing your own and having your neighbor grow something and you all exchange. And then the more people that you do that with, you'll have a full plate. All you need is, to take the time to grow one or two things. But this is the mindset that we have to start thinking and teaching the children now, because it's amazing that we do as good as we do based on what we do to our bodies. But I fear for the children because we have a different foundation than what they do. Because, like Dr. Atkins is saying, this kind of started pushing harder. It was going on for years, but they pushed harder in 93, 92, 94, around that time. And so I think we're looking at something different than what we see today as far as health is concerned in a negative place if we don't start to make some changes.
Yep. That says a lot, and so it is a miracle that we're doing, that we're walking around, functioning at any level with the stuff we are saying. Dr. Ford Atkins, any final words for our audience? I know you're loaded with a lot of information and comments here.
Dr. Palmer really said it all. I mean, I agree with that 100%. If I said anything, I would just be bearing more bad news, because I really have to focus on, I want the audience and everybody to understand that it really comes down to our immunity. That when we talk about GMOs, we talk about food, the biggest key is that immunosuppression. And with what's going on right now with the pandemic, it's not so much the virus, but it's showing the population, it's showing the world population just a health status where we are. That we really have to do something. Like Dr. Plummer says, it's amazing that we're doing as well as we are. We see that, but for a person that's 30 and older, you're at risk right now, just based on diet and nutrition, just based on what you're eating, whether it's plant-based or whether it's genetically modified or processed or however. So we have to make some changes. This is a wake-up call to make changes, not just for what's going on right now, but everything in the future from this point forward. For the next 10 years, you have to be proactive and you have to be critical about what you pick up with your hands and put into your body.
Amazing. Dr. Pam Atkins, last words of the day. We'll close it out. Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm just grateful and thankful for your audience, and just learn just to live by intention, and just to choose make healthy choices and know what you put in your body. But yes, uh, we need to back away from the food we know is not healthy, and so if there's less demand for it, perhaps we will have better options. But we have to be aware. And even restaurants, we need to be aware what restaurants have more organic foods and things like that, because and we don't always look for that at a restaurant, but we need to ask about more cleaner restaurants that provide more cleaner food.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Pam Atkins. Thanks, Dr. Celeste Palmer. Thanks, Dr. Floyd Atkins. I'll see you guys backstage. I'll close out. And thank you, audience, for joining us tonight. And again, please subscribe if you haven't. Press the thumbs up button. Share some love with likes or loves. And share the information. I think this is a very important presentation. Not a lot of talk is done on GMO foods, and it's one of those things that get hidden below the surface. But I like Dr. Pam Atkins' last comment in terms of living intentionally, and we have to be very intentional about what we do, what we consume, and where we get our foods. I mean, too often, we will just get something and put it in our mouths. We're just going to pick up something from the store and put it in our mouths. And we live in a nutritional landmine. There's a lot of talk about food deserts, but I think we're all in a food desert. When you think about it, you may go to your store and there's a lot of pretty produce, but if 90% of it's genetically modified, then you may be as bad off as a person going to the fast food store getting genetically modified junk food. Maybe there's some benefit, but we don't know. There's not much science behind this. So we should all consider ourselves living in some form of a food desert, and we need to be intentional. We need to, investigate. If you go to a restaurant, do they have genetically modified foods or not? So the whole concept of being intentional about how we live, I think, is an important one. And as we try to inform you, empower you through information to improve your own health first and foremost, and then spread the wealth of information to your friends and loved ones. But we hope this has been helpful, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And until next time, I want to keep it fresh, natural, and live. Have a good day.